Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the lure of modern, particularly Shanghai modern. To start with, let's listen to a song by a very famous artist during the time. Let me share screen with you here. Okay, so you can look for her. She's a very famous singer in the 30s. Her name is Zhou Xuan. So I don't know how you think about this video. So this is particularly about this modern time during the 30s. And as you could see, she's wearing a qipao and, all this like modern during the 30s. So today we're going to talk about Shanghai in the 30s and the writers group, New Sensationalist, and particularly two writers, Shi Zecun and Mu Shiying. So let's take a look at this picture. I want you to think about, what is presented here? As you could see, this is a lady wearing a simple dress instead of a qipao in the old time, right? And represented at the back is also the symbol of modern Shanghai. So by 1930s, Shanghai had become bustling cosmopolitan metropolis, the fifth largest city in the world and the China's largest harbor and treaty port. It was called the Paris of Asia. In English, modern stems from the Latin modal, right, meaning recently or of late. In the study of European history, the start of the modern era refers to the French Revolution of 1789 and or the Industrial Revolution of the early 19th century. In Chinese, modern, as some of you know, Chinese in the word is modern, right? So sometimes we hear this word modern 女郎, modern girl, right? The English word modern revealed its first Chinese transliteration in Shanghai. The Chinese word modern has a meaning of novel and professional. It's influenced by the West as politically for a century. From 1843 to 1943, Shanghai was the treaty port of divided territories. Architecture-wise, you could see a lot of development then. So this is the most famous urban space in the 1930s Shanghai. We call it Shili Yangchang. So Shanghai's riverside, we call it Bund. Remember this name as it will show up pretty often. As you could see, we also have Clock Tower to echo London's Big Ben. And across the river, there is famous Cafe Hotel. This is a hot spot for visiting foreigners and a public place for business meetings. The Palace Hotel, the Shanghai Club, and the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corporation, Shanghai and Hong Kong Bank, and 24-story Park Hotel and Palace Hotel. For many, bonds represents the foreign settlement and the city's globalized participation in global commerce. And we can also see department stores including Sansan and Wing'an, Sincia, and they're all located in Nanking Road. You could also see a lot of dance halls. By the 1930s, dance halls had become another famous or infamous landmark of Shanghai's urban milieu. So at that time, most dance halls were ballrooms and we call it cabaret. So the dance halls we today call 舞厅 or 舞场. So the former refers to the places with a more deluxe decor and often featuring cabaret performances patronized mainly by foreigners, whereas the latter had only a small band and the taxi dancers or dance hostesses. And later we will talk about this writer Mo Shiying. He himself is a dancer and he danced a lot in a dance hall called Moon Palace. And it was where he also knew his wife. The central setting of his fiction is dance hall, as you see from this week's reading. In such a time when Shanghai became such an exotic place, non-traditional and non-Chinese, there emerged a question how individual existence is defined in this urban space. So it is in this setting that we talk about today's these writers, and they are called new sensationalists. In Chinese, they are a group of 新感觉派 writers. So as a lot of you know, 感觉 meaning feelings, sensations. So that's why it's called 新感觉派. They sought to portray the dynamic experience of modern urban life, and they were in the context of May 4th and new cultural movements. As you know, we previously read like May 4th writers like Lu Xun, right? And they react against traditional Confucian values. Instead, they promote Western influence ideas around democracy, gender equality, and modernization. And like the new women writers who promote independence and freedom, at this time they pursue individualism. Here, they also convey the experience of living in the chaotic and cosmopolitan metropolis of Shanghai. So here I want to show you some of the paragraphs that represent this new sensationalist, and you will see it's in the quiz. So look at it. I'm fooling you. I haven't been engaged and don't wish to be. And of course, this sounds like a playboy, right? So easily you can guess it's from the story, The Man Who Was Treated as a Plaything. Second paragraph, it was the rainy season. And of course, it's about rain, right? One evening in the rainy season. This one, the traffic gates of tracks interlocks with car headlights, blah, 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 is from Shanghai Foxtrot. So first, I want to talk about one writer called Shi Zechun. Not needing you to read this week, but he was very famous new sensationalist writer. And he was born in Suzhou, but he spent most of his youth in Songjiang in Zhejiang with his father, who is a teacher. He's interested in poetry and started to publish at youth. He edited a journal, Les Contemporains, like 现代杂志, from 1932 to 1934. According to critic Liu Fan, he may well have been the first modern Chinese writer to consciously use Freudian theory in order to bring out an undercurrent of sexual obsession in his fictional landscape, a landscape both realistic and surrealistic. He began writing in high school when he liked classical Chinese poetry. He's known of the experimental technique with which he has become China's pioneer modernist. So one of his famous stories is called One Evening in the Rainy Season. 《梅雨之息》published in 1928. It was one of Shi Zechun's earliest stories and is representative of the psychoanalytical style for its stream of consciousness narration. Its depiction of man as alienated by life in a big city and his portrayal of subconscious desire. So if you have read the story, you may find it boring because it's just a first-person narrator protagonist walking around the familiar streets of Shanghai in a pouring rain. Sounds not very exciting, but the detailed description is really interesting, especially at the time. But the familiar sights are subtly transformed into a dreamlike stage, and as the narrator watches her stop down from a tram without an umbrella and stand at the street corner waiting for the rain to stop, his interior monologue reveals an inner agitation he can hardly control. So, and this goes on and on. And so some of these, I'm not going to elaborate on this story, but if you're interested, go look at it. And as I say, stream of consciousness is one of the main features and main techniques these writers use. And they often use interior monologue. And what does this do, right? So it's again, showing this random Ford and the modernist, and we will explore more about that later. Mo Shiying is also another very famous, we could call modernist writer and experimental essayist, short story writer. He lived a very short life as he fell victim to an assassin in 1940. He was active in Shanghai in the 1930s, where he contributed to journals like the contemporaries, like the 现代杂志, edited by Shi Zechun, we talked about earlier. And some of his most famous stories include Shanghai Foxtrot, Cleveland A, and Five in the Nightclub. As I mentioned before, he's also a very good dancer, and he actually married a Cantonese dance hostess, as you see here, Qiu Pei Pei. And modern girl is an image often appears in his stories. Before we get into a story, we want to have a discussion of the modern girl, right? So I want to let you see this caricature. This is a caricature in 1928 of a Chinese modern girl just in a qipao, as you can see here. And she's smoking a cigarette as she gazes at a pretty man kneeling in the palm of her hand, which is really interesting, right? And cigarette is an erotic teaser here, along with this advertisement from Shanghai newspapers for the Swiss chocolates and the lipsticks, all which help to situate the story within the urban milieu of the pre-war Shanghai. So here comes the Shanghai girls and modern girls. And that is the femme fatale during the time. And as you could see, a lot of advertisements, no matter the magazine covers and sometimes the 火柴盒, its covers, they all embody the city's material grammar. So such women are frequent subjects of Mo Shiying's work as well, which depict the pressures and dangers of romantic love in the metropolis. And as you could see in his work, he would talk about, oh, is she a new woman? Right? It's very complicated story. So like later in some of his stories, or the other story that we talk about, the man who was treated as a plaything. So you could see that it is again, like a paradox that he presents. Okay, so here is a paragraph that I want to show you about 容子. Yeah, so in this story, the man who was treated as a plaything, is it clothes? This was truly a girl who lived on stimulation, speed, 容子, jazz, machines, speed, urban culture, American flavor, contemporary beauty. She was made of all these things, right? But again, there is a paradox here. She's not fully a new woman. because only if she marries an extremely ugly and stupid person will she be able to manipulate her husband and maintain a position of power in their relationship, right? So here, most women might have the upper hand as they play one man against the other, but at some point, the tables will turn. We will discuss more through the story we all read, Shanghai Foxtrot, 上海的虎步舞. And this story first appeared in the journal 现代 Modern in 1934. It has been reprinted many times, for example, in 胡焕章 and 海派小说精品等等. And the original title has a subtitle Fragrant. And he claimed the Shanghai Foxtrot was a technical exercise and experiments, that of a longer novel that he wrote later. So this story first starts with this: a heaven built upon a hill. And then there's this detailed paragraph that, elaborates on the scenes. Why is it a hill? I want you to think about it. And again, there may be a lot of reasons that you can think about. For me, it's a lot of things that's shown in the story, right? The murder in the quiet evening. Then is a rich man Liu Youde coming home, his wife and son asking him for money to enjoy the nightlife. A worker falls under a wood. All this. And why? We could see this later, right? And as we also know, the historical semi-colonial metropolis of Shanghai is presented here, right? Like we see in this clue, the Johnny Walker billboard advertisement. We also can see in the story the cigarette smoking American, besides a real estate utopia, the Indian policemen, the churches and racing clubs, the department stores and hotels. And all these remind us of Shanghai as a treaty port, as a space deterritorialized by foreigners, right? So here, I want you to pay attention to this book, The Lure of the Modern, by a very famous Sinophone critic called Shi Shumei. So this is her name. And she raised this theory of bifurcation. What does that mean? So Shanghai is a site of urban modernity, so we call it capitalist modernity, but at the same time is semi-modernity and imperialist city. So she argues that to many Mayford writers, they separate capitalism and colonialism, but Mo Shiying separates combines cosmopolitanism and imperialism, nationalism. So there is this metropolitan West and Japan, and at the same time, there is this colonial West and Japan. So this is very important. So at the same time, this is simultaneously urban modernity, and simultaneously it is a semi-modernity city, right? And semi-colonial city too. So I asked in one of the questions that, what's your experience of reading the story and what impressions does it give you? Like, what's the writing style? So this, I will let you answer that question because there's so much to talk about. But time is compressed into a series of visual impressions and still captured through a camera here, right? Cutting between different shots of the city and its people, it's easy to see it as a miniature. And this is one of the most interesting paragraphs that I find in the story, not just for its evocation of the nightclub atmosphere here, but for the fact that a page or two later, the entire paragraph is actually replicated in reverse. So here you see, oh, someone sits alone in a corner holding a coffee, and another place you would see a lone man sits in the corner holding a black coffee. So these two paragraphs, so this is a Chinese original and really So this is the English here. So as you could see, these two paragraphs, they go back and forth, right? And become linguistic equivalents to carefully choreographed dance with the scenes and scenes twisting to around the floor of the test like a group of foxtrot dancers in a forward and backward formation. So as you could see later on this camera, I'm going to, have you see this camera moving back and forth, right? So a rich housewife and her stepson, a Chinese movie actress, and a Belgian jeweler pretending to be a French gentleman. As the two couples exchange partners, the characters are made to repeat the same words of fake endearment. The entire scene is filmed in a Hollywood musical style where everything is stylized. And Shanghai Foxtrot is a modern experiment in a spatial form, therefore, and the urban spaces are envisioned here as fictional cinema. Last but not the least, let's go back to the title, Foxtrot. Why does he choose Foxtrot as this title and the metaphor of Shanghai at the time? As you know, Foxtrot was a popular dance as Shanghai was a popular location, and people during that time in the 30s were interested in the dance, and the town is portrayed as having a lively, popular crowd. And some of the characteristics of the dance, like it really reflects the city, the back and forth movement between tradition and modernity, the images portrayed in the story, etc. So to understand better what is actually this formation, we can look at a dance together. Foxtrot.
You left me sad and lonely. Why did you leave me lonely? 'Cause here's a heart that's only for nobody but you. I'm burning like a flame, dear. I'll never be the same, dear. I'll always place the blame, dear, on nobody but you. Yes, you. You're driving me crazy. What did I do? What did I do? My tears for you make everything hazy, clouding the skies of blue. How true were the friends who were near me to cheer me, believe me, they knew. But you were the kind who would hurt me, desert me when I needed you. Yes, you're driving me crazy. What did I
Maybe after watching this, you want to dance now, right? I don't know how to do foxtrot either, but as I said, it was a very popular dance in the 30s, and we previously talked about the cabarets and the dance halls. This is where it happened, and the dance itself, as you see, could be very graceful and promiscuous, could be romantic but sensual. While dancing the foxtrot, at times the couple spin in turns that can make one dizzy. And Moo describes at times that the city lights and sightings at night being in blur like he is caught up in dance. And the dancing itself distorts the wheel like the late night activities of the city that can distort Shanghai and its surroundings. The foxtrot can be a very active dance as well, and the city is described as always being active and alive. The dance can have a lot of twists and turns, right, as you could see in the previous video, but usually progresses forward. As you take steps forward, you then take a side step or turn or walk backwards. And so this describes the situation during the night as time still progresses throughout the night. So you could see twists and missteps within the characters and even in the city. A good example is that the girl that's described as being the prettiest dancer in the club, but later that's found in an alley having to sell herself for money, right? In the story, the Belgian juror is walking down the street and sidesteps into the alley and then find himself in a hotel room with the girl. So there's a lot of ups, downs, twists, turns, romance, and love come all together in that situation. The foxtrot can have a very close embrace with the couples, as you see. And so the mother and son and the Belgian juror and the people, they all dance together. And there's an emphasis on this tight embracing, cuddling, like with the dance. Again, seeing the flirtation and romance in these scenarios as can be portrayed in foxtrot. The foxtrot can be smooth or bouncy and rough, again references the good and bad sides of the city, the smooth talking about the glamourous hotels, rich families living in big houses, fancy jewelry, cars and clothes, and attractive people. But with the rough pimps, conspirators, and other dangerous activities as well. That's why it was hell, right? Like in the beginning. So I want you to compare a little bit of all these senses and feel again what you actually see in these stories, right? Um, and so you will see some of these questions or other questions in the quiz, so we're not going to elaborate. I hope you have fun. Thanks for listening.